Story 1. The Passenger from the Ghost Station. There are 3 unwritten rules when you drive the graveyard shift for a rideshare app. Keep your doors locked until you see a face. Never ask what's in the duffel bag. And trust your gut over your GPS. I've been driving a beat-up Nissan Altima around the outskirts of Chicago for 2 years, mostly catering to the late-night bar crowd. I thought I had seen it all: pukers, lovers, fighters. But I was wrong. I didn't have a dash cam back then, and honestly, the events of that night are the sole reason I went out and bought one the very next day. It started like any other Tuesday. The city was asleep, the roads were slick with rain, and the surge pricing was dead, but the tips were usually decent enough to keep me on the clock. Around 2:30 a.m., my app pinged. It was a pickup request from an old gas station way out in an industrial district, a place that looked abandoned even during the day. As I rolled up, the hair on the back of my neck stood up. You know that primal instinct that screams, "Run"? That's what hit me. The gas station was completely dark. No pumps running, no lights in the convenience store windows, not a single other car in the lot. Then I saw him. He was pacing frantically back and forth in front of the shattered glass of the store entrance. He was wearing an oversized, grimy windbreaker that looked like he'd pulled it out of a dumpster, and he kept whipping his head around to look over his shoulder, like he was expecting a pack of wolves to come bursting out of the shadows. His movements were twitchy, erratic, textbook signs of someone high on something bad. My finger hovered over the "cancel ride" button. I should have pressed it. I really should have just hit the gas and left him there in the rain. But curiosity, or maybe just stupidity, got the better of me. I unlocked the doors. He didn't speak. He just yanked the back door open and slid onto the vinyl seat. Immediately, the vibe in the car shifted. Most passengers bury their faces in their phones, but not this guy. He sat dead center in the back seat, staring right at my eyes in the rearview mirror. He didn't blink. He didn't look at the passing streetlights. He just locked onto me with this intense, angry glare that made my skin crawl. The silence was suffocating, so I reached for the dial to turn on some low-volume jazz, just to cut the tension. "Turn it off," he snapped. His voice sounded like gravel grinding in a blender, deep, raspy, the voice of a chain smoker. I flinched, jerking the wheel slightly, but I killed the radio immediately. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white, just praying for the ride to be over. We drove in absolute silence for another 10 minutes. I was hoping he'd just stay quiet until I could dump him at his destination. Then he leaned forward, his face inches from the gap between the front seats. "You ever pick up someone you shouldn't have?" he whispered. The question hit me like a punch to the gut. I let out a nervous, dry laugh and said, "Man, I hope not." He didn't laugh back. He just leaned into the seat and started muttering a story about how he used to drive a cab in the city. He was slurring his words, rambling about how he quit the job because some punk kid stole from him. I glanced in the mirror while he was talking, and that's when I saw it. He was smiling. A wide, toothy, unnatural grin while talking about losing his livelihood. That smile was more terrifying than any threat he could have made. "It's funny," he murmured, his eyes wide. "How much trust you put in a stranger sitting right behind you." That was it. My adrenaline spiked. I stopped looking at him as a passenger and started looking at him as a threat. I focused on the GPS ETA. 6 minutes left. Just 6 minutes, and he'd be gone. But he wouldn't stop talking. The conversation devolved into gibberish, And then, suddenly, he started apologizing. He wasn't talking to me, though. He was looking at his hands, whispering, "I didn't mean it. I'm sorry. I'm a bad person." It sounded like a confession. I kept my mouth shut, terrified that acknowledging him would set him off. I didn't want to know what he had done. We were 2 miles from the drop-off when he suddenly snapped out of his trance. "You missed the turn!" he screamed, lunging forward. I hadn't missed anything. The GPS clearly showed we were going straight, but panic took over. I slammed on the brakes in the middle of the empty road. "I'm stopping! Just get out!" I yelled, my voice shaken. Before he could respond, blue and red lights flooded the cabin. A police cruiser had turned onto the street behind us, its spotlight sweeping over my trunk. The change in the passenger was instant. He melted. He slouched down in the seat, practically laying flat on the floorboards to hide from the rear window. He stayed frozen like that, barely breathing, while the cop car cruised slowly past us, clearly looking for something else. Once the cruiser's taillights faded, the guy popped up. "You got lucky," he sneered. He didn't even wait for me to unlock the doors. He threw the door open while we were still rolling slightly and sprinted into the darkness of a nearby alley. He vanished in seconds. I turned the app off immediately and drove home, shaking the entire way. I didn't sleep that night. 2 weeks later, I was scrolling through a local news feed and saw a headline that made my blood run cold. The abandoned gas station where I'd picked him up? It had been the scene of a brutal armed robbery that exact night, just minutes before I arrived. The clerk had been held up, and the suspect had fled on foot. It makes me sick to my stomach knowing I was inches away from a desperate criminal. I never called the cops. I have my own reasons for avoiding the police. But I learned my lesson. I still drive, but now I'm a lot more careful about who I let into my back seat. Story 2. The neighbor who wasn't there. I moved to the Adirondacks because I needed silence. Not the kind of quiet you get in the suburbs where you can still hear the hum of a distant highway, but absolute, suffocating silence. After surviving a brutal mugging in NYC that left me with a severe case of hyperacusis, a condition where everyday noises felt like gunshots going off next to my ear, I couldn't function in society anymore. My therapist suggested exposure therapy, but I chose isolation. I found a rustic A-frame cabin buried miles deep in the state park, accessible only by a single dirt track. The listing promised 0 neighbors for miles, which is why I was surprised when, 3 days in, I heard a knock on the heavy oak door. I opened it to find an elderly woman standing on my porch. She looked like something out of a storybook. Long silver hair, a heavy wool shawl, and eyes that were a piercing, unnatural shade of blue. She was holding a basket of apples. She introduced herself as Mrs. Halloway and said she lived just down the ridge, about a 15-minute hike through the dense pine forest. She thrust the basket at me, almost aggressively. I took it, muttering a thanks, but the vibe was wrong immediately. She didn't smile. She just stared at me, analyzing my face. Then, she leaned in and whispered, "Keep your fire hot, your curtains drawn, and your knife close." It wasn't friendly advice. It sounded like a threat. I watched her walk away, counting the seconds until her footsteps faded into the forest floor. It took a long time. She didn't look back. That night, a massive storm rolled in. The wind was howling through the valley, shaking the A-frame like a rag doll. I was actually enjoying it. Nature's noise didn't trigger my anxiety like city noise did. But around 10 p.m., a frantic banging on the door shattered the peace. It wasn't a polite knock. It was desperation. I grabbed a heavy flashlight and looked through the peephole. It was Mrs. Holloway. She was drenched, shivering, looking terrified. I opened the door, and before I could even speak, she grabbed my arm. "I saw a man by your shed," she hissed, her eyes darting toward the darkness behind her. "He was watching your windows. You need to be careful." My stomach dropped. I stepped out onto the porch, sweeping the beam of my light across the yard. Rain slashed sideways, blinding me, but I didn't see anyone. I asked her if she was sure, and she just nodded frantically before turning and sprinting back into the woods without another word. I locked the door, heart pounding. But as I sat there in the dark, my brain started poking holes in her story. If she lived 15 minutes away, why was she near my shed in a thunderstorm? To see my shed, she would have to be standing in my backyard, not walking on the trail. Was she snooping? I couldn't sleep. Around 2 a.m., I heard the distinct snap of a dry branch right outside my bedroom window. I army crawled to the window and peeked over the sill. The storm had broken, leaving a heavy mist. Standing at the edge of the tree line was Mrs. Holloway. She wasn't looking at the house anymore. She was facing the woods, her back to me, standing perfectly still like a statue. I ducked down, terrified. When I looked back up a minute later, she was gone. I convinced myself I was hallucinating from stress, but an hour later, the knocking returned. This time it was soft, rhythmic. Tap, tap, tap. I crept to the door, expecting the old woman again. I looked through the glass. It wasn't her. It was a man, huge, wearing a dirty flannel jacket, with a thick beard and eyes that looked dead. Panic, cold and sharp, flooded my chest. I didn't scream. I ran silently to the bathroom, locked the door, and dialed 911. While I was whispering to the dispatcher, the tapping turned into smashing. I heard the front door splinter. Wood cracked, glass shattered, and heavy boots stomped into my living room. I heard him tearing the place apart. Furniture was overturned, lamps smashed. He was looking for something, or someone. I curled up in the bathtub, praying he wouldn't check the bathroom. Suddenly, silence. Then, sirens in the distance. The police arrived 10 minutes later, but the man was gone. They swept the perimeter but found nothing. I was shaking, hysterical, telling them about the man and my neighbor, Mrs. Holloway, who had warned me. I begged them to check her cabin down the ridge to make sure she was safe. The officers gave me a confused look but agreed to hike down the trail. When they came back, their faces were grim. "Son," the sheriff said, "there is a cabin down there, but nobody has lived in it since the 90s. The roof is caved in. It's a ruin." I insisted they were wrong, that I had just seen her. They told me there were no signs of life, no food, no bedding, nothing but rot and dust. They said it was likely squatters using the abandoned structures in the park to case robbery targets. I packed my bags that morning. I didn't spend another night in the Adirondacks. I don't believe in ghosts. I think the reality is much scarier. I think Mrs. Holloway and that man were working together. She was the scout, playing the role of the concerned neighbor to test my defenses and see if I was alone, while he waited in the woods for the signal. And the sickest part? She warned me he was coming just to watch me panic. Story 3. The Voice on the Line. My girlfriend Jenna and I have this tradition. Since we started dating at UMass 3 years ago, we've always done the midnight run for Christmas. Neither of us likes the chaotic holiday traffic, so instead of driving during the day, we leave Boston at 11 p.m. on Christmas Eve and drive through the night to reach her parents' place in rural Vermont. There is something hypnotic about driving north on I-91 when the rest of the world is asleep. It's just headlights, snow flurries, and the endless black void of the forest. We usually blast 90s grunge playlists and sing until our throats hurt, feeling like we're the only two people on Earth. This year, the drive felt different. The snow was coming down harder than predicted, and the reception on the radio kept cutting out, leaving us in pockets of dead silence. We were about 2 hours in, winding through a particularly desolate stretch of road, when my music cut out. My phone screen lit up on the dashboard mount. Unknown caller. I frowned. Getting a spam call at 1:30 a.m. on Christmas morning was weird, even for telemarketers. Who calls this late?
Jenna asked, turning down the heater.
Probably a bot, I muttered, hitting decline. We went back to the music. But 2 minutes later, the music stopped again. The same unknown caller screen flashed. I ignored it again, feeling a prickle of irritation. Jenna made a nervous joke about how dedicated these scammers were, but her laugh sounded forced. When it rang a third time, I snapped. The repetition was grating on my nerves, and the driving conditions already had me on edge. I snatched the phone off the mount and swiped answer, ready to scream at whatever robot was on the other end. "What?" I barked into the speakerphone. I expected silence or a pre-recorded message about my car's extended warranty. Instead, I heard static. Heavy, breathing static. Then a man's voice cut through the noise. It was calm, low, and terrifyingly clear. "Hello, David." I almost swerved into the guardrail. My heart hammered against my ribs. "Who is this?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. The man didn't answer my question. Instead, he started reciting numbers. My social security number, my parents' address in Boston, the make and model of the car I was currently driving. He spoke with a rhythmic, detached cadence, like he was reading a grocery list. I felt cold. Not the winter cold, but that deep, visceral freeze of pure fear. I looked over at Jenna. She was pale, her eyes wide and locked on the phone. "What do you want?" I shouted, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. The line crackled. The man chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "I don't want anything from you, David," he said. "I'm not here for you. I'm here for Jenna." The air left the car. Hearing my girlfriend's name coming from that voice was infinitely worse than hearing my own. "You have the wrong number," I stammered, desperation creeping into my voice. "I don't know who you are." "She's sitting right next to you," the voice hissed. Panic took over. I slammed on the brakes, skidding onto the snowy shoulder of the highway. "Listen to me, you sick." Before I could finish the threat, Jenna moved. She didn't scream, she didn't cry. In one fast, fluid motion, she reached over, tapped the red icon, and ended the call. The silence that followed was deafening. I turned to her, adrenaline coursing through me. "Why did you do that?" I yelled. "He was threatening us. We need to find out who that is." Jenna wouldn't look at me. She was staring straight ahead at the snow-covered windshield, her hands trembling in her lap. "I was scared," she whispered. "I just wanted it to stop." I tried to call the number back. Once, twice. It wouldn't connect. It was like the number didn't exist. We finished the drive in silence. I kept watching the rearview mirror, expecting headlights to appear, expecting to be run off the road.
But nothing happened.
It's been a month since that night, and physically we are fine, but the relationship is different. I can't shake the feeling of how quickly she hung up the phone. It wasn't the clumsy reaction of someone who was terrified. It was the precise reaction of someone who didn't want the caller to say anything else. I keep asking myself, how did a stranger know exactly where we were? Why did he ask for her specifically? And why, when I look at Jenna now, do I get the sinking feeling that she knows exactly who was on the other end of that line?